From Kemet to Kush, from the banks of the Nile to the valleys of the Sudan, Africa's story begins not with chains, but with crowns. It begins with wisdom so ancient that the world still measures time by the knowledge that flowed from its soil. Before empires rose in the West, before philosophers debated in marble halls, there was Kemet, the Black Land, the cradle of thought, science, and spiritual understanding. It was here that humanity looked up at the stars and saw not chaos, but order. It was here that men and women studied the movement of the heavens, the flow of the river, the rhythm of life itself, and turned that observation into civilization. Africa's eternal wisdom has never been just about knowledge. It was about harmony. The people of Kemet understood that life was sacred balance, the balance between man and nature, body and spirit, community and individuality. This wisdom was not written only in books or carved into stone. It was written into the rhythm of living. The pyramids were not only monuments to kings, they were messages to time itself, saying that greatness is not measured in years, but in purpose. When Kemet flourished, the world came to learn. Scholars from distant lands traveled to study under African priests, mathematicians, and philosophers. The temples of Thebes and Heliopolis were the universities of the ancient world. Geometry, medicine, astronomy, and architecture, all were born here in the sunlight of Africa. Yet as the centuries passed, the truth of Africa's wisdom was buried beneath the dust of conquest and the smoke of colonial lies. The world rewrote the story, calling others discoverers while Africa was labeled forgotten. But truth does not die, it sleeps until the right time awakens it. Then came Kush, the next guardian of that eternal flame. When Egypt began to fade, the kingdom of Kush rose from the south, proving that Africa's light could not be extinguished. The Nubian kings and queens carried the torch of civilization, ruling with dignity, vision, and strength. They built cities that rivaled the greatness of their predecessors, wove art that told stories of both power and peace, and nurtured wisdom that transcended generations. The journey from Kemet to Kush was not merely a shift of power, it was the passing of an idea, the belief that Africa's greatness was a continuous flame, not a fleeting spark. This eternal wisdom survived invasions, slavery, and colonization. It survived because it was never held in one place. It lived in the people, in the songs of griots, the patterns of cloth, the stories of ancestors, and the strength of those who refused to forget where they came from. Every African carries in their DNA the memory of builders, thinkers, and dreamers who once ruled the known world. The chains of oppression tried to erase that memory, but memory cannot be conquered. It only hides, waiting to be remembered. When the colonizers came, they did not only steal land and gold, they stole the story. They turned the cradle of civilization into a question mark, convincing generations that Africa began with slavery rather than civilization. But history tells a different truth. From the hieroglyphs on temple walls to the manuscripts of Timbuktu, Africa's fingerprints are on every page of human advancement. The wisdom of Kemet and Kush lives on in the philosophies of Ubuntu, the art of storytelling, and the resilience of a people who refuse to be broken. To know Africa is to know that power is not always loud. The pyramids still stand, silent yet unyielding, as if whispering to the world, "We were here first." The temples of Nubia, though weathered by time, still hold echoes of prayers older than any empire. These structures are not ruins. They are reminders. They remind us that Africa's decline was never natural. It was engineered. It was the result of fear. Fear of a continent so rich in spirit, so abundant in resources, and so intelligent in design, that unity among its people would make it unstoppable. From Kemet to Kush, the wisdom that once guided kings now calls out to a new generation. It says, remember who you are. It asks us to stop looking outward for validation and start looking inward for truth. The greatest tragedy is not that Africa was conquered, it's that Africans were convinced they were powerless. But the truth is, the same spirit that raised the pyramids still beats within every African heart. That same creative energy that charted the stars still flows through the veins of its descendants today. The world wants Africa to forget, to remain divided, distracted, and dependent. But Africa is awakening. The drums that once called people to ceremony now call them to unity. The youth are rediscovering what was hidden, reclaiming the pride that was stolen, and rebuilding the narrative that was buried. Every African innovator, artist, and thinker today is a modern pharaoh, building not with stone, but with vision. The journey from Kemet to Kush teaches us that greatness can be delayed, but it can never be denied. Civilizations fall, but wisdom endures. That wisdom tells us that Africa's greatest strength is not its gold or oil or diamonds, it is its people. A united Africa built on the foundation of ancient wisdom and modern vision is not a dream, it is destined. The time has come for Africa to rise again, not in the image of others, but in its own reflection. When we remember Kemet, we remember knowledge. When we remember Kush, we remember resilience. Together they remind us that Africa was, and still is, the mother of civilization. The journey was never about loss, it was about rediscovery. The spirit of Kemet still shines through African innovation. The pride of Kush still roars through African leadership. The flame has traveled through generations, carried by ancestors who refused to let it die, and now it burns again. It burns in the eyes of young Africans who build technology from dreams. It burns in the voices of those who tell the truth about their heritage. It burns in the movement of artists, leaders, and visionaries who are reclaiming Africa's place in the world. The journey from Kemet to Kush was never a straight path. It was a circle, leading us back to where we began, to wisdom, to pride, to unity. Africa's eternal wisdom is not ancient history, it is living truth. It is the reminder that the world cannot move forward until it acknowledges where it began. Every human civilization carries a piece of Africa within it, its science, its language, its spirit. And one day when the world looks back honestly, it will see that the story of progress is the story of Africa. So rise, Africa, not because the world allows it, but because it is your birthright. Rise, because your ancestors built empires that defied time. Rise, because your story is not one of pain but of power. From Kemet to Kush, the flame has never gone out. It only waited for this generation to remember that Africa was never lost. It was only hidden in plain sight, and now the world will remember. The journey from Kemet to Kush is not just the story of two ancient kingdoms. It is the living heartbeat of Africa's eternal wisdom. It is a journey that stretches beyond time, beyond borders, and beyond the sands of the Nile. It tells of a people who built more than pyramids and temples. They built a legacy of intelligence, artistry, and resilience that still echoes in the soul of every African today. The brilliance of our ancestors was not buried with them. It flows through our veins, waiting for the day when we finally remember who we are. Greatness was never lost. It was only forgotten, and this generation is beginning to remember. When we look back to Kemet, known to the world as ancient Egypt, we see the foundation of human civilization. But what the world often forgets is that Kemet was Africa. Black Africa. It was the land where science, mathematics, and philosophy were born, not in laboratories, but in the hearts of wise men and women who studied nature and the universe with profound understanding. The Egyptians observed the stars long before telescopes existed. They mapped time and measured the earth when the rest of the world lived in shadows. Their architecture was not only grand, it was sacred geometry written in stone, expressing spiritual truths that guided their lives and society. This was the Africa that taught the world order, harmony, and knowledge. As we travel further south to Kush, we meet another chapter in the same eternal story. The Kushite kingdom, born from the heart of Nubia, stood as both the successor and the guardian of Kemet's legacy. The world called them the Black Pharaohs, rulers who once marched north to restore Egypt when its culture began to crumble. Kush was the reminder that Africa's flame could never be extinguished, only transferred from one hand to another. When Kemet's monuments began to fade, Kush built new ones. When Egypt's rulers forgot their divine connection to the people, Kush reignited it with courage and pride. The message was clear. Africa's wisdom is eternal because it belongs to the people, not the palace. Yet somewhere along history's path, that wisdom was stolen. Buried beneath colonial lies, rewritten by foreign tongues that sought to erase Africa's light. The world began to tell a different story, that civilization began elsewhere, that Africa was the student and not the teacher. But truth does not die, it waits. And today, as descendants of Kemet and Kush rise once again, truth is finding its voice. Africans across the continent and the diaspora are waking up to a reality that has been suppressed for centuries, that they descend from kings, scholars, engineers, and philosophers who shaped the world's understanding of life itself. Every African heartbeat today is an echo of the drums that once sounded in the temples of Kemet and the palaces of Kush. Those rhythms taught balance, Mot, the principle of truth and order, a way of life that guided society toward justice, compassion, and knowledge. The ancestors believed that a nation without balance was a nation doomed to fall, and that lesson still stands today. Africa's rebirth begins with remembering that principle, not through imitation of the past, but through the restoration of its. When we say that greatness lives within us, we do not speak of pride alone, we speak of responsibility. The pyramids were not built by miracle but by vision, discipline, and collective unity. Those builders believed in something larger than themselves, a purpose that gave meaning to every stone they carried. Today, Africa must find that same purpose again. The future will not be built by those who seek power, but by those who seek purpose. We must study, innovate, and build not for personal gain but for the awakening of a continent. In the time of Kemet and Kush, education was sacred. Knowledge was considered divine because it connected the human mind to creation itself. Today, as technology and progress reshape the modern world, Africa must remember that its greatest resource is not oil, gold, or diamonds. It is wisdom. The intelligence that once measured the stars can now rebuild nations. The creativity that painted ancient walls can now design future. The spirit that ruled over empires can now guide generations toward unity and excellence. The story of Africa has never been one of weakness. It has always been one of endurance. For centuries, others have tried to control its narrative, to make Africans forget their past, so they would never question their present. But the time for silence is over. From Lagos to Nairobi, from Accra to Johannesburg, and across the oceans to the descendants of the diaspora, there is an awakening. People are rediscovering their languages, their names, their art, and their truth. The spirit of Kemet and Kush is rising again, not in ruins or relics, but in hearts and minds. The world feared Africa when it was united in knowledge. The priests of Kemet held the keys to medicine, mathematics, and cosmic law. The architects of Kush understood power not as domination, but as service to humanity. When Africa rediscovers that kind of unity, it will not just reclaim its place in the world, it will transform it. This is not a dream of the past, it is the destiny of the present. Every young African who studies their history, every artist who reclaims their culture, every leader who governs with integrity, and every parent who teaches pride to their child, they are all part of that rebirth. Let us remember that Africa's wisdom was not confined to temples or thrones. It lived in the people, in the farmers, the craftsmen, the healers, and the storytellers. They understood that life was sacred, that every generation was a bridge to the next. The same spirit that built pyramids now builds community. The same intelligence that guided empires now guides entrepreneurs, thinkers, and dreamers. The future of Africa will not be found in foreign aid or borrowed ideas, but in the rediscovery of its own eternal principles. The journey from Kemet to Kush is not over. It continues with us. It calls us to rise, to rebuild, to remember, to understand that our greatness was never taken. It was only waiting for our recognition. The stones of the pyramids may not speak, but the hearts of Africans do, and they speak loudly now. We are the descendants of wisdom, the heirs of creation, and the authors of our future. When Africa remembers who she is, the world will remember what humanity truly means. Because the light that began on the banks of the Nile was never meant to fade, it was meant to shine across time. The torch has passed to us and we must carry it with pride, unity, and purpose. From Kemet to Kush and beyond, Africa's eternal wisdom endures, unbroken, unshaken, and unstoppable. Long before the world called itself civilized, Africa had already discovered the true essence of knowledge. It was not simply information or skill, it was a way of living in harmony with the universe. The people of Africa understood that wisdom was not something to be owned, but something to be lived, something that flowed like the Nile, endless, nurturing, and life-giving. From Kemet to Kush, from the banks of the Nile to the heart of the savannah, knowledge was seen as the breath of existence. The ancestors believed that every human being carried within them a divine spark of understanding, and it was their duty to develop that light through discipline, observation, and respect for all creation. Africa was the first classroom, and nature was its teacher. The rhythm of the rain, the movement of the stars, the growth of crops, all these were lessons written not on paper but on the fabric of life itself. In Kemet, the pursuit of wisdom shaped the foundations of society. The scribes who wrote in hieroglyphs were not mere record keepers, they were custodians of cosmic law. They studied the alignment of the stars not for curiosity, but to understand humanity's place in the vastness of creation. They developed mathematics not just to build monuments, but to express balance and order in the world. Knowledge was sacred because it connected humanity to something greater than itself. And when the world still wandered in ignorance, Kemet taught that the purpose of learning was not power but enlightenment. Every temple, every statue, every scroll was built on the belief that knowledge brings harmony between the seen and unseen world. Kush continued this legacy with equal brilliance. Its scholars, rulers, and builders inherited the wisdom of their northern ancestors and infused it with the strength and pride of Nubia. They were not imitators of Egypt. They were the guardians of its spirit. When Egypt's light began to fade under the weight of invasion and arrogance, Kush rose to remind the world that Africa's mind could never be conquered. The great kings and queens of Kush, such as Tahaka and Amenaditor, ruled with intellect and vision. They built cities filled with art, libraries, and temples dedicated to knowledge and justice. Their philosophy was simple yet powerful. Wisdom is freedom, and ignorance is captivity. They understood that true leadership begins with understanding oneself and one's people. The wisdom of Africa did not vanish when its kingdoms fell. It lived on in oral traditions, in the proverbs of elders, in the songs of griots, and in the teachings passed from generation to generation. While foreign powers tried to silence African knowledge, it survived in stories told under moonlit skies and in rituals that celebrated life's sacred cycle. The world underestimated Africa because it could not read its books, but Africa's books were not written with ink, they were written with spirit. They were carried in the rhythm of the drum, in the courage of warriors, in the artistry of weavers and sculptors, in the patience of mothers, and in the wisdom of fathers who taught their children that understanding life was the first step toward mastering it. Africa's true wealth was never its gold or diamonds, it was its mind. Every invention, every system of governance, every artistic masterpiece began with a thought. Before the Greek philosophers, before the Roman scholars, Africa had already explored the depths of reason and spirit. The knowledge that flowed from this continent influenced civilizations around the world. Yet history books rarely tell that story. They paint Africa as the receiver, not the giver. But time reveals truth, and truth is that Africa was the origin of knowledge itself. It was the continent that gave birth to medicine, architecture, agriculture, philosophy, and art. The wisdom of Africa laid the foundation for the modern world. Even today, when technology defines progress, Africa's ancient knowledge offers lessons that modernity often forgets. The people of Kemet and Kush understood that progress without wisdom is destruction. They taught that knowledge must serve humanity, not enslave it. In today's world of information overload, Africa's ancient philosophy reminds us that intelligence without purpose is empty. The ancestors measured greatness not by wealth or conquest, but by balance. Balance between man and nature, between body and spirit, between ambition and humility. That is the eternal power of African knowledge. It is not temporary or selfish. It is universal and timeless. The modern generation must rediscover this inheritance. The wisdom that once guided the Nile must now guide innovation, leadership, and community. African youth must know that their intelligence is not something new, it is ancient. It is the continuation of a genius that built pyramids with precision and aligned monuments with the stars. This awareness changes everything. It transforms self-doubt into pride, fear into determination, and confusion into purpose. Africa does not need to look outside for answers. It needs to look within. The blueprint for progress has always been here, written in the DNA of its people and the memory of its soil. As the diaspora reconnects with the motherland, a new chapter is being written. The sons and daughters of Africa scattered across the globe are rediscovering the greatness buried beneath generations of silence. Through art, science, education, and entrepreneurship, they are bringing back the old flame, the eternal fire of knowledge that once lit the temples of Kemet and the palaces of Kush. This is not just history, it is destiny unfolding. The circle that was once broken is being made whole again. Africa is not rising, it is remembering. And when a people remember their wisdom, no force on earth can stop them. Africa's wisdom teaches us that knowledge is not a race to conquer others, it is a path to understand ourselves. It tells us that every child born on this continent carries within them the memory of stars, the rhythm of drums, and the strength of ancestors who refuse to be forgotten. It reminds us that learning is sacred, that creation is divine, and that purpose gives life meaning. Knowledge for Africa was never about control, it was about connection. It was about seeing the divine reflection in all things and using understanding to build rather than destroy. So as the world moves forward, Africa must return to its roots, not to dwell in the past, but to carry its wisdom into the future. Every invention, every discovery, every act of kindness must echo the eternal philosophy of its ancestors, that life is sacred and understanding is power. The power to heal, to unite, to build, to elevate. That is the legacy of Africa's eternal wisdom. It cannot be erased by time or stolen by empire. It lives, breathes, and grows within every mind that dares to seek truth. Knowledge is Africa's eternal power, a power that does not fade, does not fear, and does not fall. It stands like the pyramids, unbroken and everlasting, whispering to the world that wisdom was born here and it will rise here again. The story of Africa's empires is not just a collection of events from the past. It is a mirror reflecting what can be achieved when unity becomes the foundation of progress. From the kingdoms of Mali and Songhai to the empires of Kemet and Kush, Africa's greatness was always built upon connection, cooperation, and collective purpose. The ancestors understood that no single tribe, kingdom, or ruler could carry the destiny of the continent alone. They knew that true strength came when people recognized their shared roots, when they saw themselves not as separate tribes but as one great family bound by culture, ancestry, and spirit. Division weakens, but unity elevates. It is this truth that made ancient Africa the cradle of civilization and the heartbeat of human knowledge. Unity in Africa was not a political slogan, it was a spiritual and cultural reality. It lived in the way people traded goods across vast deserts, in the way families intermarried across kingdoms, and in the way knowledge flowed from one region to another like a great river. The trans-Saharan trade routes connected the minds and hearts of people thousands of miles apart. They shared science, art, and philosophy as easily as they shared gold and salt. The idea of Ubuntu, that I am because we are, was not merely a proverb but the lifeblood of a civilization that valued human connection above individual gain. Every act of generosity, every collaboration between tribes, every alliance between leaders was an expression of unity, and that unity gave birth to greatness. But as history unfolded, external forces sought to dismantle that unity. Colonial powers understood something that Africans at the time could not fully see, that a united Africa was unstoppable. So they divided it. They drew lines on maps, splitting families, cultures, and kingdoms, and taught Africans to see each other as different rather than related. They planted the seeds of division, religion against religion, tribe against tribe, color against color, until the spirit of brotherhood was overshadowed by the struggle for survival. What once was a single drumbeat of harmony became 1,000 scattered rhythms, each struggling to be heard. The tragedy of Africa's colonization was not just the loss of land, but the loss of unity. Yet, even after centuries of separation and conflict, the soul of Africa has never forgotten its song. The memory of oneness still lives in the stories of the elders, in the shared dances and languages, in the way strangers greet each other as brothers and sisters. The call for unity still echoes across the continent and the diaspora. It is the call of history asking Africa to rise again, not through imitation of its past empires, but through rediscovering the principles that made those empires thrive. Cooperation, respect, and mutual upliftment must once again become the foundation of Africa's renaissance. Unity is not the absence of diversity, it is the celebration of it. Africa's strength has always been in its diversity, hundreds of cultures, languages, and traditions forming one magnificent tapestry of human brilliance. But when diversity turns into division, that tapestry unravels. When Africa begins to see difference as beauty instead of threat, progress will follow naturally. A united Africa will not mean a continent without individuality, but a continent that channels its differences toward a common purpose, prosperity, dignity, and global respect. The world today still underestimates what Africa can become because it measures the continent by its divisions, rather than its potential. But when Africans rediscover their shared roots and realize that their destinies are intertwined, they will rise to heights unseen before. Imagine an Africa where nations trade freely, where borders are bridges, where education and innovation are shared resources, and where every child knows their history not from the viewpoint of colonizers, but through the truth of their ancestors. That vision is not fantasy, it is destiny waiting for courage. The modern generation has the power to complete what the ancestors began. With technology, communication, and a growing consciousness of identity, Africa can now unite faster and stronger than ever before. Young Africans across the world are awakening, artists, scientists, thinkers, and leaders who no longer see themselves as bound by national lines, but as citizens of one great motherland. The diaspora, once scattered by force, is now returning by choice, bringing with it new ideas, skills, and passion to rebuild the cradle of humanity. This reconnection between the continent and its people abroad is more than migration. It is spiritual restoration. It is the reuniting of a family separated by centuries of pain. A united Africa will not only change its own story but the world's. For too long, others have defined Africa through the lens of poverty and conflict. But unity will redefine it as a powerhouse of innovation, culture, and leadership. The world will no longer look at Africa with pity but with respect. Africa's unity will be a light for all humanity, proving that cooperation can replace competition, that understanding can replace exploitation, and that peace can rise where division once ruled. But unity will not come easily. It will demand humility, forgiveness, and courage. It will require Africans to let go of inherited resentments, to look beyond tribal and political lines, and to see the bigger picture, a future where all stand as one. The task may seem immense, but it is possible because the blueprint already exists. The spirit that built Kemet, the collaboration that raised the walls of Timbuktu, the trade networks that linked West Africa to East, all these were born of unity. What was done before can be done again, and even greater. The call for unity is not just a call to action, it is a call to awakening. It is time to remember that Africa was never meant to be a divided continent. Its destiny was always greatness through togetherness. Every border drawn by foreign hands can be erased by shared purpose. Every wound left by history can be healed by understanding. When Africans across the world recognize that their struggles are connected, their victories will be as well. The Renaissance of Africa will not come from one leader, one nation, or one moment. It will come from millions of minds and hearts uniting behind one dream to restore the dignity, pride, and power of a continent that once led the world. When Africa stands together, it does not rise alone, it lifts humanity with it. For Africa's unity is not a threat, it is a promise that knowledge, peace, and progress will always find a home where unity reigns. And when that day comes, when Africans rediscover their shared roots and stand together once more, the world will witness a power greater than any empire ever built. It will not be a power that conquers, but one that inspires. It will be the rebirth of a people who finally remember that they were never meant to compete with one another. They were meant to complete one another. That is the destiny of Africa. That is the promise of unity. And that is the future waiting to be written by the hands of those brave enough to believe once again in the power of one.